It's now a runoff between Spencer Wetmore and Carol Temple for South Carolina House District 115, which covers James Island, Folly Beach, and Kiowa and Seabrook Islands. I speak exclusively, Spencer, for this edition of Quintin's Close-Ups. And if you haven't already, subscribe to my YouTube channel and like Quintin's Close-Ups on Facebook. Spencer Wetmore, welcome back to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Thank you so much for having me, Quintin.
You're very welcome. Obviously, you are a Democratic candidate for South Carolina House District 115, which covers Folly Beach, James Island, and of course, Kiowa and Seabrook. And now I understand that you are in a runoff between you and obviously Carol Temple for that particular seat. Mm-hmm. And I know over the past couple of days, you've been getting a lot of endorsements from Richard Rizik to Brady Quirk-Garvin to Bakari Sellers to Joe Cunningham. Who is Spencer Wetmore now?
Gosh, just the same person I was last week, but it is kind of crazy. It's been really overwhelming and humbling seeing the amount of support coming in. I think we've got a lot of momentum going into this. All these folks, it's the same message, right? There are some talented Democratic women that were in this before the runoff and now, but I think everybody, it's a recognition that, hey, we've got the momentum coming forward. We've got the right formula to win this in the general election, and so we're really excited.
What's your message right now?
Sure. Well, it's pretty similar to what it's always been. I really believe in the power of people to make a difference. This is something that I've been in. I've been in local government for 10 years now, and I really, I spent a lot of time. I've been in local government for about 10 years now. And a lot of that time I've been a little bit in the background, right? I've spent a lot of time working on ordinances and working on things, of course, that then I hand over to mayor and council. And rightfully so, that's been my job. But I've been in the background for a really long time. And so none of that changes. The message doesn't change. I still believe that, I'm the right person for the runoff. My message hasn't changed since day one. I've got the local government experience. I've got the relationships and the heart to serve. And so I'm just excited and honored to have everybody's support.
But where was your momentum on primary night?
Well, I think we really tried to focus our campaign leading up into the primary on reaching out. I've called about 1,200 voters myself leading up into the primary. And we did exactly what we thought we were going to do on the primary night. We actually were within about 2 points of what our projections were for everybody's, performance that night. Remember, I came into this not as an elected official, not really even as a well-named. Didn't have a lot of name recognition coming into this because, like I said, I'd really been in the background. But as people got to know who I was, got to know about my campaign, got to know what the values and the issues I stood for, we came from way behind to almost winning on June 9th, and now I think we just carry that momentum forward in the runoff.
You said you have a formula for the general election. Where's your formula for this runoff? Right.
Well, it's we're still working on reaching out to individual voters. I've talked to a lot of people over the past 2 weeks. 2 weeks is a pretty short time frame, but in the runoff, it was really important for us to focus, on making sure that people understood that I had the support of a huge array of people, both in the party, everyday folks here, throughout the community. And so I think we've just really focused on making sure everybody understood that we've been out in the community. We have the relationships. We're ready to go.
You talk about earlier about the values and issues. What are the values and issues right now for House District 115 in your mind?
Well, I think they've changed, honestly. Coming into this election, I think that there were, like I said, I called, probably 1,200 people, and everybody that I talked to, it was flooding, it was traffic, it was environmental issues, offshore drilling, and I think, like a lot of people, the constituents in 115 have new issues now. And it's not to say that the flooding and the environmental stuff isn't important to them anymore. Ooh, you got a really excited bird here. It's not to say that the environmental issues and all that's not still important, because it is. But we can chew gum and walk at the same time. And so I think everything that's been going on, not the least of which was George Floyd, but I think that was the straw that really forced everybody to say, look, this is not working. We have work to do. So the COVID has changed our focus in terms of pandemic and, the healthcare and what we're doing in terms of public testing. And then I think we've really realized how much more work we have to do. Now, I think that this is something that's been near and dear to my heart for a long time. I worked at the solicitor's office intentionally knowing that it was my hope that I could make an impact. I worked very closely with the Turning Leaf Project, the mental health court, the drug court. But I do think that these are priorities that for our community are becoming more relevant right now, and I'm excited about that.
What priorities would you have as a state representative when it comes to issues such as race?
Well, I think we've got a lot of work to do, and it's not just criminal justice reform. It's not just law enforcement. Yes, of course I want to see requirements of the body cameras be activated, requirements of that footage be made accessible, funding for this. I want to see requirement of de-escalation training. These are things that I've been fighting for in my time at Folly, in my time at the solicitor's office, and they're important. But it's not just an issue of law enforcement and criminal justice. I started in college. I did my thesis on restorative justice. I founded the prison reform chapter of the Princeton Justice Project. So these are issues that are near and dear to my heart. However, there's a lot of issues when you come to, racial equity is not just about law enforcement and criminal justice. We've got to look at how our school system is operating. Are we distributing resources evenly between districts that might have more minority children? Are we letting our home values dictate how much funding a school gets? Those are the kinds of issues we have to be looking at. We have to look at our environmental policies. How are we making sure that people, either minorities or just low income in general, neighborhoods are not being disproportionately impacted by water quality issues, by environmental, what is our land use policy and planning, making sure that we're protecting those neighborhoods just as much as, the fancy neighborhoods that of course, can get attention when they come to a meeting. So
what is the water quality issue right now in House District 115?
Well, I think we certainly have some water quality issues. I've been proud of my time on Folly Beach that we have actually done very well. We've worked very closely with the Charleston Waterkeeper, but the rest of the 115 does have some issues. So there are several waterways on James Island that actually have been identified through the federal government MS4 or Clean Water Act program as being substandard. And so we actually formed a joint task force looking at how we can improve that water quality. It's everything from making sure that we're not polluting to making sure, that's where the plastic bag bans come into place. That's where we make sure we stop offshore drilling and just making sure that we're, taking the steps we need to make sure that this non-point source runoff isn't overly contaminating our waters.
And what's that point right now?
Well, I think right now that's kind of the issue, is that there's not one contributing factor. It's everything. It's the runoff. It's making sure that all this sort of dispersed runoff isn't sort of coming into the waterways. There's not one single point, and that's kind of the challenge of what we're facing right now.
And you talked earlier about a joint task force. Would you create a joint task force as a state representative to find, obviously, diversity with education?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that there's a lot of work to be done. I've said all along that the key is making sure that the stakeholders are at the table. So making sure in this case that the teachers are at the table, making sure that there are community representatives at the table to make sure that everyone's voice is heard. Our Education Oversight Committee up in Columbia, it's not representative of the community. It doesn't have very few educators on that board. And I think that's the first step, is making sure that you're changing the statute to change the, we already set out, hey, we need, one teacher, one whatever, one, that's what we do for all the boards in the state. And the Education Oversight Committee should be no different. We need to make sure we've got community voices, teachers' voices, shaping the policy that goes into our schools.
And what's the second step?
Well, then you got to fund it. That's just, there's no way around it. You've got to fund your teachers. You got to fund your schools. You got to fund your classrooms. We can't have overcrowded classrooms. We can't have buildings falling into disrepair with air conditionings going out in the middle of the summer. We start school in August. It's hot. We can't, at Burke High School, their air conditioning wasn't working for 2 weeks. That's unacceptable. So we've got to make sure but it comes down to funding.
And, I'm sitting one block away from the John C. Calhoun Statue, which has been a hot topic over the past couple of days. Where are you as a candidate for the State House on the Heritage Act?
Well, I think the John C. Calhoun statue, he he was vice president back in 1830, right? That statue didn't go up during his lifetime. It intentionally went up in 1895 as South Carolina's constitution was disenfranchising Black people from voting. And so we absolutely need to be taking a closer look. History belongs in a museum. And I think we're not trying to erase the history. We're not trying to say, hey, we don't believe that this should be, we shouldn't talk about this. We absolutely should be educating our kids as to what John C. Calhoun's policies were, why they were, why they were harmful to our community. Along with, sure, yeah, he had some accomplishments. He was the vice president. He was a state senator, federal senator, right? So that no one's erasing history by saying that these statues belong in a museum. I think that we certainly have a lot of work to do there.
And where's the common ground on this issue?
Well, I think the common ground is just that, making sure that people understand that this is a part of our history. I think from everything I know, a lot of folks who, especially in, maybe the last 20 years or so, who've supported Confederate monuments and all that, I understand being interested in history. I understand wanting to know more about, what our community was like and all that. But, we got a lot of great things about being Southern too, that we can still celebrate, right? Like, let's celebrate front porches and sweet tea. But this idea that we're clinging to these relics, to somehow identifying us as Southerners, no, that's not what they do. So I'm excited that there's a lot of movement now. The common ground is that they belong in a museum, and we learn about them in that way.
And where should the movement go on the topic of healthcare?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's something, that's a position I've had since day one. And I think, I say it again, you got to expand Medicaid as a first start. This is something that the federal government funds 90% of. In other states that have expanded Medicaid, you are seeing an overall net savings for their state budget, because folks that have unpaid, public hospitals that have unpaid ER bills, folks that don't have insurance coverage are being, taking advantage, rightly so, of state mental health, drug and alcohol treatment programs. But when you get these folks insurance coverage, well, now all of a sudden the state is seeing a net savings to their budget. So that's got to be the first step.
And when you look at the budget right now, what do you say?
Well, I mean, we certainly have work to do. I believe we will still have a surplus when we come out of this. I think that, although it will be smaller than anticipated and projected after the pandemic shut down a lot of our businesses, I do believe there will still be a surplus. And we've got to be identifying ways that we can use that surplus to the benefit of our people. That means funding our schools. That means, looking at how we're funding healthcare. I think making sure that we're funding treatment programs, making sure that we're funding the Restoring Promises program in our South Carolina Department of Corrections. There's just some amazing work that can be done, and we need to be committed to that.
Spencer Wetmore, thank you so much for your time. And again, welcome back to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Thank you, Quintin. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.